Driven by an unusual quest, a man isolates himself in his apartment, aiming to record absolute silence. He meticulously removes all distractions, ensuring every potential noise source was neutralized. The air grew heavy with anticipation, a profound stillness settling over the room. He sat perfectly still, his breath shallow, acutely aware of his own heartbeat in the profound quiet. After what felt like an eternity, but was precisely 30 minutes, he reviewed the recording. Initially, the playback offered nothing remarkable, just the expected flatline of an empty soundscape. A wave of disappointment washed over him, a sense of anticlimax after such intense preparation. However, his meticulous nature compelled him to scrutinize the audio more closely, enhancing the faint signals. He adjusted the equalizer, boosting the lower frequencies, then the higher, searching for any anomaly. Suddenly, at the 17-second mark, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper emerged from the static. It was barely audible, a ghostly breath of sound that sent a shiver down his spine. He replayed the segment, his heart pounding in his chest, straining to decipher the spectral utterance. The whisper solidified, forming distinct words, chillingly instructing him to turn around. A cold dread seeped into his bones, a profound sense of unease settling over him. This unnerving discovery was compounded by the fact that he had remained motionless and silent. He had not stirred, not even a muscle twitched, throughout the entire recording session. His mind raced, grappling with the impossible implications of what he had just heard. Who or what could have uttered those words when he was demonstrably alone and still? Intrigued and profoundly disturbed, he decided to repeat the experiment under identical conditions. Every variable was controlled with even greater precision, every potential sound source rechecked. He positioned himself once more, a statue of focused intent, the recorder humming softly. The second 30 minutes passed with an even greater sense of tension, the silence almost oppressive. Upon reviewing this new recording, the results were far more unsettling than the first. The audio was no longer a single, faint whisper, but a cacophony of layered voices, multiple whispers intertwined, overlapping and echoing, creating a disquieting chorus. All of them, without exception, repeated the ominous phrase, "We can hear you." The words seemed to emanate from every direction, surrounding him, invading his personal space. It was as if the very air in his apartment had become saturated with these spectral voices. Fear, cold and undeniable, began to set in, gripping him with an icy tendril. This was no longer a scientific curiosity. It was something deeply personal and terrifying. The realization that he was not alone, that unseen entities were aware of him, was paralyzing. His carefully constructed sanctuary had been breached, its silence now a conduit for the unknown. The whispers were not just sounds. They were a direct communication, a chilling message. They implied a constant, pervasive presence, an awareness that transcended physical barriers. He felt exposed, vulnerable, as if his every thought was being scrutinized by unseen eyes. The initial scientific detachment had evaporated, replaced by a primal sense of dread. He clutched the headphones, the disembodied voices echoing directly into his mind. The sheer impossibility of it all only amplified the terror, making it more surreal. He tried to rationalize, to find a logical explanation, but none presented itself. The meticulous conditions of his experiment ruled out any conventional source of sound. These were not external noises, they were intrinsic to the silence he sought to capture. The very absence of sound seemed to be the medium through which they communicated. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the otherwise silent room. The air grew thick with an unseen presence, the hairs on his arms standing on end. He felt a profound sense of being watched, observed, even judged by these entities. The whispers were a warning, a declaration of their existence and their omnipresence. His quest for absolute silence had inadvertently opened a door to something beyond comprehension. The line between reality and the supernatural blurred, dissolving into a terrifying uncertainty. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that he could not simply ignore this phenomenon. The voices had chosen him, for reasons he couldn't fathom, to deliver their message. This wasn't just a recording, it was an interaction, a terrifying dialogue initiated by the unknown. The fear, though potent, was slowly giving way to a desperate, dangerous curiosity. He had to understand, to confront the source of these unsettling communications. The implications were too profound, too disturbing to simply walk away from. His scientific mind, despite the terror, demanded answers, a resolution to this enigma. The whispers had drawn him in, ensnared him in their silent, echoing web. He was no longer an observer, but a participant in a terrifying, unfolding drama. This burgeoning fear, coupled with an insatiable need for understanding, pushed him. It pushed him towards a dangerous inquiry, a confrontation with the impossible. He knew, deep down, that there was no turning back from this path. The unsettling chorus of, "We can hear you," had already pushed him to the brink of his sanity. Now, a dangerous inquiry, born from a desperate need for answers, began to form in his mind. Overcoming the paralyzing fear that had gripped him, he finally dared to vocalize the question. His voice, trembling slightly, broke the manufactured silence of the room as he asked, "Who are you?" He immediately played back the recording, his heart pounding in his chest with an anxious rhythm. An instant response, chillingly clear, echoed from the speakers. "You already know." A cold dread washed over him, not just from the words, but from the voice itself. It was identical to his own, a perfect mimicry of his tone and every subtle inflection. This uncanny replication sent shivers down his spine, a profound violation of his very identity. But the most terrifying realization was yet to fully dawn upon him, a truth far more insidious. This answer, this chilling, self-referential reply, had appeared on the recording before he even posed the question. The timestamp confirmed it, an impossible anomaly that defied all logic and understanding. It suggested a preternatural awareness, a consciousness that existed outside the linear flow of time. It knew his thoughts, anticipated his words, and responded before they were even uttered. The implications were staggering, a cosmic joke played on his fragile human perception. In a final, desperate attempt to grasp some semblance of control, he decided to record again. This time, he remained completely silent, a statue of terror and bewildered curiosity. He simply pressed record, letting the device capture the oppressive quiet of his apartment. Upon playback, the recorder captured not one, but two distinct voices, conversing softly. Their tones were dispassionate, almost clinical, as if discussing an interesting specimen. One voice, deeper and more resonant, stated with an unnerving calm, "He's starting to understand." The other, lighter and more ethereal, replied with a sense of urgency, "Then we're running out of time." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken threats and a terrifying sense of impending doom. He was no longer an observer, but the subject of their chilling, unseen discourse. Overwhelmed by the sheer impossibility and the profound violation of his privacy, he acted impulsively. With trembling fingers, he deleted all the files, every single recording of the echoing silence. He needed to erase the evidence, to pretend this nightmare had never happened, to reclaim his sanity. Then, without a second thought, he fled his apartment, leaving behind the oppressive silence. He ran, not knowing where he was going, only that he had to escape the unseen presence. Yet, despite his frantic efforts, a single corrupted file persisted, stubbornly refusing to be erased. It was a fragment, a broken piece of the nightmare that clung to his digital existence. He played it, dreading what he might hear, but compelled by a morbid curiosity. The corrupted audio crackled. Then a chilling fragment of a voice emerged from the static. It whispered, clear as day, a promise and a threat. "Next time, we won't use the recorder." The words resonated in his mind, a final, terrifying confirmation of his worst fears. The silence was not empty. It was a conduit, a medium for something ancient and malevolent. He had sought to capture silence, but instead, he had awakened an entity that now knew him, understood him, and no longer needed his tools to communicate. The world outside his apartment suddenly felt no safer, no less permeated by the unseen. He was exposed, vulnerable, and forever marked by the echoing silence he had dared to disturb. The whispers would follow him, not through a device, but directly into his mind. He had opened a door, and now, it seemed, there was no closing it. The concept of absolute silence, once a scientific pursuit, had become his personal torment. Every quiet moment would now be filled with the anticipation of their unseen presence. The voices, his voice, would haunt him in the quietest corners of his existence. He wondered if he would ever truly be alone again, or if they were always there, always listening, always waiting, always just beyond the veil of perception. The recorder was merely a gateway. The true horror lay in their direct awareness. His quest for silence had led him to an unbearable cacophony of the mind, a symphony of dread, played by unseen conductors just for him. He had sought to understand the void, but the void had understood him first. And now it was coming for him, without the need for any intermediary device. The silence he once craved was now the most terrifying sound imaginable, for in that silence, he knew they would always be present, always observing. His life, once meticulously ordered, had been irrevocably shattered by a simple experiment. He was no longer just a man. He was a subject, a target, a plaything. The echoing silence had found its voice, and it spoke only to him, a chilling, personal monologue that would never truly end. He was trapped, not in his apartment, but within the confines of his own mind, forever listening for the whispers that no longer needed a recorder to be heard.